Hello, this is Dana. I think I'll start. Welcome, everyone, for being here tonight. We love that you're sharing part of your night with us. We are lifelong learners, and we hope that you are too. And today we will be talking about equitable learning and inclusion. And our goal is that we are going to give you takeaway strategies for including students with disabilities in general education. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Dana Thomas. This will be my 29th year as a pediatric SLP, which I've loved every minute of it. The bulk of my career has been in private practice. My husband and I started a company in Northern California called Jabber Gym, where we served children for 20 years, are still serving children, and we provided services to local school districts with speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy for kids. We did early intervention, and now we are proud members of the Point Quest group. I am here today because I love sharing my experiences and I want to lift up leaders like you in our educational community. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Megan.
So my name is Megan, and I'm a bilingual SLP in Arizona. I've been working in schools full-time in Arizona for 16 years. And I've also had the opportunity to do bilingual services across the state with evaluations, program management. I've been a part of opportunities to set up services and develop SPED programs with charters in California. And so that's kind of my professional background, along with some of the clinical experiences. But um, today's topic is really something I'm very passionate about. And I know I said that last time, but I mean it too this time, as far as inclusion, because as a speech language pathologist, Dana and I both work obviously with students that have disabilities, and many of you do as well. But also, I feel like we're both uniquely positioned to present on this topic because we're also parents of students with special education needs and significant needs that did impact their ability to be included in a general education classroom. So we'll probably share some stories today. Hopefully they don't bore you, but that's kind of the direction that we're looking to go, and hopefully we'll be able to, like Dana said, empower you to promote inclusive practices with your general education staff.
Okay, just a couple of reminders. We want this to be an interactive webinar. We want you to put your comments, your questions, and participate via our chat. Your certificates and surveys will be sent to your email for you to submit for your 1 hour of CEUs. And we would love your feedback on future topics because it gives us the opportunity to research and learn, and we love to share with you. So the goal is that you leave this webinar being able to take something home that you can use in your classrooms or with your students tomorrow. So our learning objectives are, we're going to define and differentiate equity and equality in education. We're going to identify strategies for supporting inclusive learning environments. And we're going to understand key legal concepts such as Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, free and appropriate education, and least restrictive environment. Okay. So please take a look at this picture and use the chat to tell me what stands out. What do you notice and how does it make you feel? And Megan, maybe you could shout out some of the comments from the chat.
Looks like the person on the very right is completely left out. Exclusion, Carly's right. Exclusion, it's not accessible. I see the word equity, and we'll definitely, and not everyone has equal opportunity. Yeah, equality, not equity. Spot on. Very good. Not accessible to all who want. And everyone has a platform, but only two of the people are able to see over the fence. Yeah, the person in the wheelchair can't be involved. So a lot of really great comments. Um, Dana, so tell us a little bit more about this picture.
Oh, are we this? Okay.
Oh, next slide. So
Next
sorry.
one.
That's my bad.
No worries. No
There's
worries.
always one in every presentation. So.
Hey, we
Oh,
got this.
somebody said that the picture that we just showed, it gives a feeling of isolating. That's a great description.
Great description. So now take a look at this picture and see the differences. We love the way this illustration represents a clear difference between equality versus equitable access to learning for students with special needs. So on the left, we see all three students have a box. They have the same box in the same place. So equality in education means providing all students with the same resources, the same opportunities, the same support, regardless of their individual needs. And we all know that individual is the key word in an IEP, an individual education plan. It's going to be the key note of our webinar is to think individualized. So we clearly can see by these pictures that treating everyone the same does not always lead to fair outcomes, and it does not account for students' diverse abilities and challenges. So now we're looking to the right. It's a much happier picture. It makes me feel much more calm. Equitable access to learning ensures that students with special needs receive individualized support, individualized accommodations, modifications. In this case, support boxes. Clearly, all three students are now achieving their goal, which is watching the game on the other side of the fence. And in the classroom, these individualized accommodations and modifications are the goal to help them participate fully in the classroom. So the formal definition is educational equity means that each child receives what he or she needs to develop his or her full academic and social potential. And this is by the National Equity Project. So I think these pictures, you're probably going to think about for the rest of your life, because the minute I saw them, I finally understood what it meant to have equity in education. So we'd love to share a short video right now that beautifully describes a mindset that supports a culture of educational equity. So please enjoy.
Right. Bear with me as I work through the technology side of things.
I'm always impressed with your technology, Megan.
Oh, you're too kind.
So a friend of mine had talked about just equity in general being the existence of difference. But another friend of mine said that when we're providing equity, we're giving kids the ability to live life on their own terms. Which is to say, we've provided the educational opportunities where they can decide what they want to do, rather than having their decisions foreclosed for lack of knowledge. And so when I think of equity, I think of fit. What fits the people that are in my room, and what can give them the ability to live life on their own terms when they leave me. So I don't want to be the system and the dispenser of knowledge myself. How can I create the conditions for inquiry to occur, to develop the skills they're going to need to be independent from me, so that they can then practice that stuff on their own? I'd rather not be like a superstar to them. I'd rather be a Sherpa. I'd rather be the guy that's guiding them through, and then they start to understand, you know what, I can do this. Because you can only know what you can do when you do it independently. Yeah. And so how are we setting up our systems, for all of our vulnerable children so they can live life on their own terms? I think that's equity in the best way that I understand it now.
Okay. Let me go back to our presentation. All right.
I love hearing leaders in our community talk. It's so inspiring.
Okay. So next slide. Are you able to see the slides?
I can't see them right now.
Can't see them. Let me try something different. It's
See,
not working.
we tried to get fancy with our technology.
Should have known better. We'll try one more.
No, I see all the people now. Now we see all the people. Hi, everyone.
There we are.
We got it.
How about that?
Perfect. Okay, everyone. Now we're going to talk about equitable learning environments. If you were on our last webinar, which we hope you were, and our future one as well, we discussed that connecting concepts with symbols promotes retention and learning. So if you will please observe our cute little animals here that represent our key concepts today. So we chose the elephant to represent the classroom environment. Elephants represent equitability in the classroom because they are herd animals. Each member is valued regardless of age or abilities. Elephants demonstrate empathy, support, and cooperation toward each other, and their behavior shows that everyone, no matter their differences, has a role in the group and contributes to its strengths. So that is how we want to see our inclusive classrooms. And we're going to give you some strategies for that today. So the next one is the wolf. So the wolf symbolizes a team approach where everyone works together for a common goal. Wolves share responsibilities and contribute to the well-being of the pack. It's the whole team. And just like our IEP teams, our educational teams, our school teams, teachers, family therapists, everyone comes together together to support our students' success. And this third one is my favorite. It's the owl. It represents the legal considerations, which we always have to talk about because it's important in special education. Owls typically symbolize wisdom, knowledge, and insight. And in many cultures, which I didn't know before, but Megan taught me this, they are also seen as protectors of justice. And so as we know, an IEP is a legal document, and each individual on the team plays a very important part. So when you see IDEA, FAPE, LRE, please know these are not suggestions, but these are legal mandates that protect students' rights. So very important.
Okay. I love how nice, Dana. I love how nice you are because you say, please know these are not optional. I'm like, FAPE is not an option. It's mandatory. LRE is mandatory.
She's keeping you safe. Compliance is important.
I'm telling you. So, I sometimes have to reel that in and I get it. But I just love how polite and pragmatic Dana is. But so we're talking about in the beginning, inclusive environment and participation. The first and foremost, a lot of it requires a change in your mindset, right? You can't go into setting up your classroom for inclusion if you are coming at it with a very traditional mindset. And the first most important thing that I would encourage is creating a classroom culture of inclusion. A lot of that includes modeling and teaching that culture of respect. As I've been working through a lot of research for my dissertation, I've been reading a lot about social, emotional, and behavioral disabilities. And one theme I see across all the articles and all of the dissertations and theses that I've read is there needs to be a relationship there. That's the foundation and the cornerstone of a mutual respect between the adult and the student. Most of the initial disruption in a classroom comes, or when it escalates into something unmanageable, it's directly caused by an unnecessary power struggle. So try not to let that disruption interfere with inclusion. One of the issues that it's a really trendy topic right now is neurodivergence, and it's that awareness has become like in the forefront of our mind as educators and special education providers. One moment. I had to remind my family I'm presenting. But as far as the classroom culture, that respect and modeling, the teacher needs to model. It's very hard for a child who is dysregulated to regulate when somebody is telling them, calm down, regulate, you need to. So first we look at the why, and we'll talk about a little bit more, but one of the biggest things, like I mentioned, ultimatums and power struggles that are unnecessary are going to be your worst enemy as somebody who's trying to promote inclusion in a classroom. Behavior is really truly a form of communication. There's a reason. And when we look at behaviors with students, rather than looking at the surface level disruption, we can look at what's the why behind it. So one of the things that here's first story about my son. He is on the spectrum. So he's twice exceptional. He's on the spectrum, has ADHD, but he's also gifted. And with that comes a very strong sense of justice and a lawyer level of argumentativeness. And one of the things that he struggles with, even though he's gifted and has no like overt language deficit, is that sense of justice interfering with his ability to process when plans change. When plans change, let's say we're going to go to get ice cream after dinner, but something happens and we can't go. His mind jumps to, you lied. You lied. And that becomes a real serious issue for him because his sense of justice has been violated. And then we see behaviors escalate. So working through that and modeling how to process that, how to stay calm by staying calm when those behaviors escalate. There's a lot of times where I call it emotional triage. When a child is having a meltdown, there's no logical back and forth that's going to happen. If you close your eyes and listen to that child and they sound like a 3 or 4-year-old, it doesn't matter if they're 10, 11, 12. If they sound like they're crying or carrying on like a 3 or 4-year-old, that's the level you meet them. I've had same thing with my son who was in 5th grade, and that's the level I had to meet him. I came to him with bubbles and we had to calm down. Once they're regulated, that's where the processing happens. That's where the learning happens. So a teacher's mindset needs to shift from controlling the behavior and how it looks to what are they communicating? What's underneath, right? The iceberg kind of idea. And then looking at that emotional triage to return to some level of equilibrium so that the child can continue learning. As we look at classroom strategies that you can kind of put into place in your everyday practice before any crises come up, there are some strategies and kind of learning philosophies. One of them is the universal design for learning. Universal design for learning actually I think it's really interesting because it talks about providing multiple forms of representation, encouraging multiple forms of engagement, and allowing multiple forms of action and expression. So when I was looking at this and researching, it really does describe differentiated instruction where you're allowing the students to receive the content at a level that makes the most sense for them. Like the speaker on the video said, you're like a Sherpa, you're a guide. You're not just dispensing this knowledge and then the only way that they hear it is auditory. So it's one of those things like with that representation, maybe if they're learning like about ecosystems, you are showing them videos and then you're reading an article and then you are I mean, if you are able to, there's a field trip involved. And then maybe for engagement, you're having the kids do a Jeopardy activity, or you're talking about temperature, you're having them get up and move to different parts of the room to talk about whether they would like a dry climate or a wet climate. And then with action and expression, maybe instead of having an assignment where they demonstrate that learning, where it's an essay or presentation, they're doing a diorama or a model or a visual or a presentation. So I really want to stress that universal design for learning is phenomenal in that. And we could do a whole other training on this. We're going to keep it that 40,000 foot view, but that's one track you can go with, the differentiated instruction. Definitely leveraging your assistive technology. I cannot stress this one enough. I have students that, and I think this is pretty typical for our kids that are on the spectrum and have ADHD, that writing piece is a nightmare. It is so hard to get them to sit down and write a paragraph, even in some cases like an incident report, right? Especially getting into some of the older grades. So maybe we're using speech to text. And maybe in an English class where they're expected to write a whole 5-paragraph essay, that's huge. So maybe they use speech to text to put their ideas down. And then maybe their assignment becomes going back and filling in the capitals and the punctuation and learning those conventions of writing. But you take away that one piece because they'll get there, right? They will get there, but if that's the barrier, let's find a way to help them over that barrier, just like the equity picture. And finally, behavior supports, that's your PBIS or positive behavior intervention supports. Really, this is coming at your children and your students with a mindset of they are trying to do their best. They want to be successful. They are not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And so it's a whole mindset shift on maybe, I know as a parent, my son comes across this a lot because he does let his mouth get away with him at school. But that thought of, he is going to tell the truth. If he cursed at a teacher, he will tell you. And so not assuming that they're going to be dishonest to save their own neck, giving them the benefit of the doubt a little bit until you have evidence to believe otherwise, right? So those are some general kind of learning strategies in your classrooms that you could put into place. And I'm so sorry. Okay, so the next slide has to do with culturally responsive teaching. So this is another area that I'm very passionate about, and we could do a whole other webinar on, but there's a couple of pieces that I'd really like to draw our attention to. First, culturally responsive teaching. I know we're all very aware of things like diversity and inclusion, and this is definitely under that umbrella. When we think of culture, culture is typically defined as a larger community within like a region that has common language, maybe religion, social rules and roles, traditions, and other aspects that bind people over time, often for generations. So they have that common identity and heritage. In a classroom, we're looking at a microculture. So it mirrors the culture because there's still social values and rules and behavioral expectations. There's roles within the classroom and shared goals. So the way that it would parallel in a classroom is, everybody has common academic goals. There's the rules and routines. And, Dana and I got into an interesting conversation about saying behavioral or social norms versus behavioral expectations. And I had never had a conversation like this before, but it really made me think about when we talk about social norms, that implies that there's abnormality that is unacceptable. When we talk about behavioral expectations, I was telling her behavior expectations it's essentially these are the things that everybody needs to do. And usually those are a mutual within a classroom or a team, it's like a conversation. They are generally driven by like safety precautions and things to maintain order. But so it's a little bit more inclusive to talk about behavioral expectations. The other thing is behavioral expectations are expectations across the board. The students are expected to behave in a way that is conducive to learning. So is the teacher. So that's kind of the cultural responsive teaching piece. It requires awareness and reflection on a regular basis. And there's that relationship building. Again, I cannot stress relationship building enough. You can often diffuse behavioral disruptive things that may interfere with that student's ability to be included if you have a solid relationship. And I've seen it time again with as a professional and as a parent. It's student centered. So within the classroom, some of that cultural responsive teaching might be to encourage students to share stories from their cultural backgrounds. I've had teachers where my son went to school that did a potluck day where every student brought in a potluck from their country, wherever their ethnic background was from, or their country of origin, that's what they brought. Also, learning and recognizing and celebrating cultural holidays. We've got Ramadan coming up. That's that's going to be a huge holiday for Islam, followers of Islam. And on that, I know that involves not eating during daylight hours, which may also impact behavior. So kind of being aware of those things and being sensitive to those things, it really equips you to be modeling and supporting your students better. Not to go off on a political tangent, but in our current state, not Arizona, but like the state of the political system and everything that's been in the news. One of the culturally responsive things that I have recently experienced is students that I've worked with, that I've heard from colleagues that I worked with in the past who they are Mexican. This child is autistic and uses an AgCom device, an assistive tech device. And he struggles with verbal expression. And since the fall, there's been a huge uptick in behavior, tantrums. He's gotten more aggressive. And when he does regulate, they find out that he's terrified about his family getting deported or him getting deported. And whether or not that is a real possibility, logically, that's a very real fear for him. And as the adults, when we're modeling that inclusion and that relationship building, that is something that we need to be considerate of. Again, whether or not it may or may not be real, it's real to him, and that's what matters. So I'm going to pass it back over to Dana, but before I do, I saw Louise put in the chat that she had a teacher that had a menu of engagement for different assignments, so students could decide how they wanted. So back to that differentiated and universal design, students could decide how they wanted to present information. They could do an oral presentation, a diorama, illustrate the concept, write a narrative. There were she said 10-ish choices for every assignment, and that's fabulous. I think that's so cool, and that's a perfect way to illustrate that universal design for learning. So Dana, I'll pass it back over to you to talk to us about inclusive teaching strategies.
And it's a perfect segue right into inclusive teaching strategies, because we all know that students do not learn in the same way or in the same timeline or with the same resources. So as educators, it is our job to intentionally, and I think this is one of my big words, is intentionally observe and investigate what learning styles, tools, and resources work best for every student. I don't mean for the classroom, I mean for each individual student that makes up the classroom. And that's how we have to look at our curriculum. So I want you to have some take-homes today that you can use in your schools tomorrow. So let's talk about specific strategies. So first, collaborative learning. It's pretty well known, but it's an approach where students work together in groups to achieve a common goal using their unique strengths and skills. So regardless of the skills that they bring to your classroom, they will be lifting each other up in groups. So for example, students are placed in groups to complete a science experiment. Maybe one student has strong verbal skills and he explains the steps. The second student has goals for fine motor from his OT. So maybe he is pouring liquid from one glass to another. And a third student might be practicing his writing skills and maybe is recording observations with his pencils. So each assignment or each level of curriculum can be specific to each child regardless of the subject. Okay, and then flexible seating and classroom layouts. This is also the 40,000 foot view again. This is very general information, and we could go into sensory and all these things for days, but we're just going to talk a little bit more general today. So, you know, the traditional classroom is hard floors, hard wooden desks, and it doesn't matter. Every child, that may not be a perfect learning environment. I think we know that now. So the goal is creativity. Let's look at our students, each one of them, and decide what can we do to our classroom to make learning easier. So maybe it's flexible seating. So right now, I can tell you I am sitting crisscross applesauce in a fluffy pink chair. And I know for a fact that Megan, you are either bouncing on your ball or you are standing at your upright desk on your balance board. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm on the yoga ball presently with silly putty in hand.
So we know we have to make we have to be flexible within reason, but the more choices we can give a child, remember the goal is not sitting in the chair. The goal is reading, learning how to read. The goal is not sitting quietly. The goal is learning your math problem. So what can we do with that child that will help him or her learn the content better? So same with classroom layouts. The point is we need choices. I have the choice right now, well, not exactly right now, but I have the choice all day to get up from my chair and go get a glass of water if I need to, because I know that my body needs that. We need to give these kids choices. Do they need to take a break and go to the quiet area of the room? Is the scratchy carpet too much for their sensory needs? And do they need to sit on a cushion? Can we provide weighted cushions for people to sit in their chair, and that makes them happier and more content and calm? So the more ideas that you can bring to your classroom and share with everybody, this is super, super, super important. You do not want to single children out as different. You want to offer all of the resources to the entire classroom. And I can tell you that happened to my daughter one time. She's a sensory little girl, and she's in college now. But when she was in elementary school, we had an IEP in which she was a very busy little girl, and she had problems sitting. So we had a plan that she could take the library books every day when she needed to, the stack of library books to the library, and then come back. So it wasn't on a timeline. It didn't have a schedule. It was when the teacher saw that she needed to get up out of that chair and do some little proprioceptive work and get out of the classroom. But do you know what happened? That this is very back to what Megan was saying about the teachers need to be very thoughtful about the students' responses. When she left one day, one of the aides explained to the class, oh, she has to do that because she can't sit in class and be quiet. So then, of course, at recess, her friends told her that. And obviously, I was an upset mom. But in the next breath, she never did that again. And so that strategy to help her with her sensory needs was no longer available. So anyway, I was off topic, but that's near and dear to my heart, that we don't want to single kids out because of their specific needs. So back on track. Okay, let's hear. Hang on.
While you're getting back on track, Dana, I
Perfect.
do want to
Yep.
say one of the things that we'll hear from teachers, and I'm not even going to ask folks to raise their hand because I'm sure the majority of you heard this, but we'll hear from general educators, general education teachers. Well, I can't do that because that's not what all the other kids need. And, why do I have to do that for them? Everybody else can learn this other way. And what I generally will lean toward is yes, everybody else can learn this way. This child is exceptional. We've identified that. They require individualized services and accommodations. So, no, they are not, you're right. This isn't going to work for everybody, and everybody's strategies are not going to work for this child because they are exceptional. And that teacher often was part of the team that was talking and discussing about the plans. So it is definitely an opportunity where we will be able to advocate for our students.
Perfect. So, and that brings us to the next inclusive strategy, which is multi-sensory instruction. And I'm going to kind of separate it from sensory therapy. So, for example, your OT at your school may be working on a child's specific sensory needs. And so you want to take that information or just observe your child and then kind of figure out the multi-sensory instruction that can help them learn. But these things are usually good for most kids. But then when we talk about the therapy side or the sensory diet, that's a different discussion. We'll have that one in a minute. So, okay, so multi-sensory instruction is when learners use more than one of their senses when taking in new information. So we have auditory learning through sounds, hearing, and listening. You've all, heard read aloud books. Some children may follow along in their book. Other children may need their earphones on and they can't do that. But these are options for auditory learning. Kinesthetic involves movement, physical manipulation, and hands-on instruction. So, for example, a math project might be teaching ratios where everyone gets up, they're putting pressure on their feet, they're in the middle of the room, and they're the whole. And then gradually, a quarter goes to one corner, half goes to the other. And you just keep moving around practicing ratios. So it just gets kids out of their chair. Maybe develop a dance to an educational song. I still, since seventh grade, learned, I know all the inventors because of it took Bell to learn, whatever song. And I will never forget it. And I think that that's not only a great tool for memory, but it also, again, is a multi-sensory instruction. Megan mentioned Go Noodle as another way it's another program that helps kids get out of their chair. So visual learning, seeing and watching, maybe modeling an activity, an instructional video. That's something I use very often for my social skills kids, my pragmatic kids. It is so helpful when a student can watch a social interaction and then emulate or be able to say what's going wrong in that video and articulate that. And then I really see that it's thought provoking and their behavior does change. I see improvement. So that's another great one. Maybe you're acting out in a play. There's a million different things. And the cool thing about the internet is you can look up all of these activities and you will find lists and lists and lists of ideas to help you be more creative as educators in your classroom. So tactile learning through sense of touch, tracing letters on a sand tray, forming letters out of Play-Doh, and finding items in a bag of rice. Now, here is where I want to talk about sensory needs. So there are going to be some kids that are not going to touch that rice to save their life. And that is what you as a teacher are observing, that there is a sensory, something about that child cannot touch that. So one of the things that I kind of point out that's very important, and maybe you've seen it, or maybe this will be new to you, but I've been in IEPs or in meetings with educators where I hear them say, oh, my classroom uses a sensory diet. So a sensory diet for a classroom is not an appropriate term. A sensory diet is specific to each child because some sensory activities are wonderful. Maybe a child is bouncing on the ball and that child gets completely organized, but another child might fall off the ball and throw up. Another thing is the brushes. My daughter was in OT and she literally felt pain where other kids are immediately calmed. So you can have sensory activities and instruction in your classrooms, but not every activity is going to be appropriate for every child. So again, we're back to individualized. Okay, so now finally we can talk about scaffolded support. In a nutshell, I think Megan and I both agree this is one of our favorite styles of learning. I do, we do, you do. So I think sometimes with my tech issues, that's what Megan uses on me. She's like, okay, let me show you, and then we'll do it together. Now you try it. I'm like, yes, okay. So scaffolded support. So the teacher might give an example of how to solve a math problem on the board. She writes it all out. She goes step by step. She hopes that she's informed the children all the things they need to know to do the math problem. And then that's the I do. Then we might move to the we do. She might set up the groups to collaborate and problem solve. This is when we see cooperation, negotiation. It's also an opportunity for assessment. Which child seems to understand, which child does not seem to understand. And we can take, that child obviously is going to need more support and back to more support with that activity. And then so that's we do. And finally, as a last step, the teacher will instruct the children maybe to perform the activity independently by a worksheet, by, writing out an example or whatever it is that the child is doing themselves. The key is differentiation within scaffolding allows some students to move ahead while others receive more help. And again, that's being an amazing teacher, is that observation of your students, because everyone is different. Every single child is different and they're individualized. So because there are so many amazing leaders in this room right now, you might be a student, you might be a speech, you might be a teacher, you might be aspiring to be in this field, you might be a parent. We know you have great ideas and we would love you to tell us some of your teaching strategies, maybe some ideas of scaffolded support in your classrooms or in your life. And will you throw that in the chat? And maybe we may not get through them all, but at least we'll be there. And so you can see each other's ideas. And
yeah, go ahead, Dana.
I was just going to say, and throw out any questions you have as well that you might have so far in our webinar.
Yeah, and any strategies, honestly, that's one of my favorite things about these is we get to share with individuals about, we have access from the whole range of expertise and career and experience. So if you have multisensory ideas or flexible seating, any of those, we would love to have those in the chat. I see somebody here talking about in the kindergarten, they use the yoga and workout bands to put around the legs of the chairs so the kids can kick them and fidget with their feet. That is absolutely one of my favorites. And another one of my favorites is, it's not a flexible seating, but it's to put the Velcro on the underside of the desk for busy hands. And something else that I've done in therapy is when I have students that have a hard time keeping their hands to themselves, I've had it where I've given them a Post-it note and told them to draw a secret picture and cover it. And at the end of the session, if I don't know what their picture is, they get to choose a prize. Like there's all kinds of ideas to make it positive. So fabulous. All right. So other inclusive teaching strategies. So when we're looking at our daily plans, oh, there it is. Yeah, Scribe. I actually Scribe. So I just saw somebody post something about Scribe and how you can record videos and instructional videos or export it to a spreadsheet. I love that. I actually am presenting on that in Arizona for our charter schools next week on using these different programs like Scribe and things to be able to support virtual learning and hybrid learning. So that's exciting. Thank you for that. So on an inclusive teaching strategy on our daily lesson plans, what's the day-to-day? How can I do this starting tomorrow? First and foremost, clear learning objectives. Dana spoke to this a little while ago when she was like, hey, is your focus that the child sits, or is it that they learn their sight words? And that's a really tough mindset to get into when you've been kind of traditionally taught that children should sit and learn a certain way. I had a student who was in first grade years ago, and he was on the spectrum, and he started reading and was able to read at about an eighth grade level as of maybe age 2. He had hyperlexia, right? The teacher in the classroom expected him to write sentences that contained the sight words in a repetitive way. And this child is like, one, autistic, has no desire in writing, really couldn't write very well, was receiving OT services, and he already knows his words. He already knows those sight words. So every day at that time, he was having meltdowns and tantrums and throwing books and turning over chairs. And so I went in there to do an observation, and I asked the teacher, I said, what is your goal? And she said, what do you mean? I said, are you wanting him to demonstrate mastery of sight words? Is that the goal? And she said, well, yes. And I said, okay, so there's other ways to do this. And we ended up coming up with a way for him to match the phrases to pictures and put the sentences in order. And we also realized that he needed a snack at that time. And so it became also snack time because, basic biological needs have to be met. A child has to be regulated before they learn. So, that's what I mean when I say clear learning objectives. The other key factor of this is making sure the student knows at a level that's appropriate what the learning objective is. Dana had a really interesting story when we were kind of planning all this about her daughter spending time in the clinic. The adults recognized that Dana's daughter was a typical peer model. Dana's daughter internalized that there was something wrong with her. That's why she needed to be in the therapy groups, and was like, why are these adults telling me I'm fine if I'm here with all these other kids and we have issues? So making sure your students understand what the goal is as well. I run into this all the time with my son and the staff, and we are a great team. They work closely with me, but we spend a lot of time reassessing what the goal is. Within that, you can look at varied assessment methods. So it goes back to modifications and kind of that differentiated piece. We may have students who, let's say, they have a disfluency, they stutter, and presenting creates a lot of anxiety for them, which makes them stutter worse. So maybe that student, instead of presenting live to the class, they present and record themselves, and then that gets played as their presentation, and then they are graded on that. There's a lot of ways for students to demonstrate mastery. Choice and voice is another inclusive teaching strategy, especially for our students that tend to have behavioral issues. I would strongly recommend looking into opportunities for this. In therapy, we get it. Like a lot of us, we know, okay, give them choices. Love and Logic is a book series, and they have versions for teachers and parents and counselors and SPED teachers. One of the statements that has stuck with me for years, ever since I went through grad school, was you give students control on your terms, or they will take control on their terms. When it becomes a power struggle, everybody loses. So giving them choices doesn't mean ultimatums. Either you do this, or I will take recess, or you won't ever get to blah, blah, blah. It's more like, okay, the work needs to get done. Do you want to do 5 problems or 6 problems? You need to get back to work, but I understand you need a break right now. I know you want to keep playing. Would you like to play for 3 minutes or 4 minutes? I don't care what they choose. I care that they get back, and giving them that choice it's like it's giving them a little bit in that little safety deposit box so that when you need to pull out of that and they have to comply, it's there, right? Another aspect is especially with our kids that maybe are on behavior intervention plans, that voice, especially if they are like my son, he came to me and said, I don't want to do a paper tracking system for the time that I'm in class. No other kid in the school has to do that. Why didn't I get to be a part of that conversation? In his case, it's because he chose not to be. So now we're going back and fixing it. But I said, okay, tell me what you're willing to do. And he said, I'll stay in class, but I don't want to do that paper. So now it's what? Are we going to, what's our learning objective? Staying in class or filling out a paper? So those are some ideas that you can take and apply immediately tomorrow for your students that are in the gen ed classroom to support inclusion. We would love to see additional input as far as lesson plan adjustments that promote inclusion. It can be choice and voice opportunities or other varied assessment methods. I know our therapists have tons of ideas on how we can support inclusion creatively. So moving on to the next, as we support our students with disabilities, you may see that it's the same 3 points on here twice. That was not a mistake. And for those of you that are in college, or if you remember being in college and your professor or teacher said, hey, if I repeat this, it's going to be on the test. Guys, I'm here to tell you this is going to be on the test. The owl, as we know, represents the legal side of things. IEP services and implementation with fidelity, classroom accommodations by the gen ed teacher, and modifications are not optional. They are not an option. They are not based on teacher convenience. This again is where I hear teachers say, well, every kid, if I can't do that for every kid. And it's true, you can't. You can't do it for 25 kids, but you can do it for the 2 in your class that have IEPs that we've all identified have exceptional needs. So it's a huge, huge issue as far as implementing with fidelity. On that note, we get into IEPs and you might see 15 or 20 accommodations. My encouragement to your teams would be to really consider which of those accommodations are necessary for the student to access their curriculum and which of them are just general good teaching practices that the teachers pretty much implement already. Like in kindergarten and first and second grade, we already have teachers repeating things, providing visual schedules, and lots of provision for movement. So that might not be appropriate for a first grader accommodation because it's not exceptional to that student. That's a way that we can kind of be thoughtful. Another aspect of it is when you're looking at maybe extended time for assignments, put a clear defined definition of what that time is. Is it 2 extra school days? Is it 1 extra school day? Because when they get into college, there will be a defined time. It won't be just blanket extra time. So we can start training families and students for that now. We also included the wolf for this one again, because
Hey, Megan, can I throw out one thing on that topic?
Yes.
So I just want to say that for your students with IEPs, the opportunity for inclusion into the general education classrooms and resources is not a reward. You do not get to tell a student that if you do well, if you behave today, you'll get to go to Mrs. Blake's classroom. That's not acceptable, and it doesn't work, and it's against the law. So just want to throw that out.
Exactly. Yep. So if you have a student that struggles with inclusion in the gen ed classroom, you try again tomorrow. You put in provisions in place to make sure that student is safe and the other students are safe. If they fail today, they try again tomorrow, because really we're looking at 1%. I mean, Atomic Habits, James Clear writes that the goal is 1% better tomorrow. And if you look at a school year in Arizona, it's 181 days. If you strive for 1% better tomorrow, that's 181% in a school year. That's phenomenal. I'm going to kind of move on because I see we're starting to run out of time. So I wanted to touch on disruptive behavior and IDEA. Again, a whole other seminar or webinar could be done on this, but when we're talking about inclusion, we have to address the possibility that behaviors and inclusion may cause disruption to other students. And what about when the child is unsafe? IDEA does clearly, it lays out the rights and the procedural safeguards. And, you know, of course, the first pivotal thing when it comes to behavior interventions before there's ever an issue is make sure that you have built a really good relationship with your students. The rapport is so important. As you look into behavior, a couple of things I want everybody to know, and I'm sure everybody does know, but you know, when you look at students that are maybe behaving in a way that's unsafe, an IEP is not blanket protection. IDEA does not exonerate a student of responsibility if safety is an issue. It does not excuse dangerous behaviors. There's collaboration that is needed. If a short-term removal is necessary for the safety of that student or others around, then there's a protocol that needs to be filled. When it looks like there's a pattern, IDEA has identified that as 10 days. It can be 10 consecutive days or a total of 10 days of out of school, like suspension. Then you are required by law to hold a manifestation determination meeting. And that doesn't have to wait until 10 days, but 10 days is the max amount of time that you can go without that. And the team needs to determine if the issues that are arising are a manifestation of that student's disability. And if so, then maybe an evaluation or revisiting the IEP is necessary. So ultimately, the other aspect of that, though, is that the district or school is still required to provide and give that student access to free and appropriate education in their least restrictive environment. So that, again, we could do a whole nother webinar on that, and maybe we will at some point. But I did want to at least address that a little bit in terms of the legal side. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. So that is all we've got for today in terms of the content. For our key points in conclusion, equity does require intentional planning and supports. It's not something that comes automatically. Implementation of these strategies, the culturally responsive teaching practices, it all takes practice. Learning how to address and support the needs of kids with behavior and social disabilities, emotional disabilities, it takes practice. So, you know, like I mentioned, 1% growth every day gets you 181% better by the end of the school year. And, you know, I tell my students, when we know better, we do better. So as long as we're working in that direction, we're going to get there. So as we draw everything to a close, we would love to again hear feedback on any other topics and any questions that you might have. But I'm going to pass the baton over to, yeah, here's our contact information, but I'll pass the baton back to Ricardo.